Imagine you are standing on the banks of the Tiber, in the very heart of the most powerful and influential civilization in human history. Today, we are talking about ancient Rome, how it emerged, what its golden age was like, and why Rome became what it did. The mighty Apennine Peninsula is washed from the south by the Ionian and Adriatic seas. It boasts a climate favorable for agriculture and cattle breeding, rich pastures, and fertile lands. Its geographical position fostered the early and active development of seafaring. Numerous tribes inhabited the peninsula in the first millennium BCE, the Etruscans. The peninsula was populated by peoples at various stages of socioeconomic development. The northwestern part of the Apennine Peninsula was inhabited by the Etruscan tribes. It is believed they came to Italy from Asia Minor. By the end of the 6th century BCE, 12 major Etruscan city-states formed a union, led by an annually elected king and high priest. This union extended its influence over much of northern and central Italy. Their culture reached great heights. Under Greek influence, the Etruscans developed a distinctive culture. As early as the 6th century BCE, they possessed writing and used the Greek alphabet. Etruscan influence was very noticeable in the early period of Roman history. Etruscan cities served as models for the Romans in matters of state organization and army structure, applied arts, and construction. The Romans inherited from them a number of political and religious institutions. Another people who influenced the emergence of the Roman state were the Greeks. The developed cultural and political traditions of the Greeks became an example for the indigenous inhabitants of the peninsula to emulate. The region of central Italy was inhabited by Latin tribes. In the 1st century BCE, the Latin tribes began to experience the disintegration of their tribal system, and the first cities appeared. In the middle of that century BCE, several tribal communities along the banks of the Tiber River united into a single entity, the city of Rome. Essentially, this unification marked the beginning of the formation of the Roman civic community, a political formation typologically similar to the Greek city-states. According to legend, Rome was founded by the brothers Romulus and Remus, the first of whom became the Roman king. The founding of Rome and its first kings. Following Romulus, Rome was ruled by 6 more kings: Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, Ancus Marcius, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus. The last 3 kings were representatives of an Etruscan dynasty, which gives grounds to assume that in the 6th century BCE, Rome fell under Etruscan influence. Initially, the king's power was close to that of a tribal chieftain. The king performed the functions of a military commander and high priest, but his real influence on Rome's internal political life was significantly limited. During the reign of the Etruscan dynasty, Roman kings began to claim unlimited power. The reign of the first 2 kings was of greatest importance for the formation of the Roman community. Romulus is credited with creating the entire social and military structure of the community. He divided the Romans into 30 curiae and established 3 tribes for the patricians and plebeians. In addition, Romulus formed infantry and cavalry forces. The second Roman king, Numa Pompilius, laid the foundations for the entire religious and economic life of the Roman community. During his reign, the most important priestly colleges were established, a calendar was created, and numerous temples were built, the most famous of which was the Temple of Janus. Tullus Hostilius built the Senate House, which later became known as the Curia Hostilia and was considered very ancient. Ancus Marcius apparently was engaged in expanding Rome's territory and gaining access to the sea toward the Etruscan bank of the Tiber. Starting with the 5th king, Tarquinius Priscus, Etruscans came to power in Rome either as a result of the city's military conquest or through gradual peaceful penetration into the Roman community. It is indisputable that for a century Rome was under Etruscan rule, which had a tremendous influence on various aspects of Roman society's life. According to tradition, beginning with Tarquinius Priscus, we can observe a gradual strengthening of royal power, attempts to violate the procedure for electing a new king, and possibly making royal power hereditary. The last Roman king, Tarquinius Superbus, tradition depicts as a cruel tyrant who exiled the city's best citizens and made decisions arbitrarily, disregarding the will of the people and the Senate. According to tradition, the last Roman king was expelled. Self-willed and unilateral seizure of power now became deadly dangerous. From that moment on, kings were banned in Rome. This marked the beginning of the Roman Republic. Power was transferred into the hands of officials elected by the Senate magistrates. The Roman Republic. The prerogatives of royal power were temporarily granted to magistrates. Consuls were elected by the Senate from among the patricians. Later, the magistracies of quaestors, who oversaw judicial proceedings and finances, and aediles, whose duties included managing the city's economy, were established. In special cases, unlimited powers could be granted to a dictator for a term of 6 months. Magistrates were elected by the Senate from among representatives of patrician families. Thus, the plebeians had limited political rights and could not become magistrates. Moreover, the patricians owned most of the land. Plebeian debtors, unable to repay them, were forced into bondage. Throughout the early republic, the state was embroiled in a struggle between patricians and plebeians. The latter demanded a fair distribution of land allotments, the abolition of debt slavery, and the right to be elected to magistracies. All demands were eventually satisfied. The result was civil peace and the formation of a patrician-plebeian state. Foreign policy. The army represented a popular militia united into branches of troops according to property status. The main military unit was the legion, 6,000 men, divided into 30 tactical units, maniples capable of autonomous action during battle. In the first decades of the Republic, Rome endured a grueling war with the Etruscans. In the 5th century, having defeated its nearest neighbors, the Romans established their power over the lower reaches of the Tiber River. However, soon Rome's expansion was halted by the devastating invasion of the Celtic tribes, the Gauls, who sacked Rome. By the end of the 4th century, Rome had finally established its dominance over the Latin Confederation, a union of cities founded by Latin tribes. During the Samnite Wars, Rome subjugated all of central Italy and began to threaten the Greek colonies on the southern peninsula. The Greeks appealed for help to King Pyrrhus, who crossed over with his army into Italy. The Pyrrhic War. The intervention of King Pyrrhus, ruler of the small Hellenistic state of Epirus, in Rome's struggle against the Greek colonies marked the beginning of the Pyrrhic War. Despite the fact that Pyrrhus, using war elephants, inflicted a series of defeats on the Roman armies, the Romans nevertheless managed to expel his troops from Italy. After defeating Pyrrhus, Rome finally extended its influence over all of Italy. After conquering Italy, Roman expansion moved beyond the Apennine Peninsula. Here, the Romans had to confront one of the largest states of the time, Carthage. The wars between Rome and Carthage, known as the Punic Wars, lasted with interruptions for more than 100 years. The Punic Wars. As a result of the First Punic War, the Roman Republic acquired overseas possessions, the islands of Corsica, Sardinia, and part of Sicily. These territories became Roman provinces. During the Second Punic War, the famous Carthaginian commander Hannibal invaded Italy and inflicted a series of defeats on the Romans at Lake Trasimene and in the general battle at Cannae. Despite Hannibal threatening Rome directly for 16 years, the Republic's troops under the command of Scipio Africanus managed to transfer hostilities to the enemy's territory and ultimately defeat Hannibal at the Battle of Zama. As a result of the Second Punic War, Rome gained territories in Spain and effectively became the hegemon of the Western Mediterranean. In the 3rd century BCE, Rome began to expand into the Eastern Mediterranean. During the 3 Macedonian Wars, the Romans extended their dominance over the Balkan Peninsula. After the Syrian War against Seleucid Antiochus III, Hellenistic states in Asia Minor fell within Rome's sphere of influence. Finally, during the Third Punic War, Carthage was completely destroyed. Rome became the largest Mediterranean power. conquest wars contributed to a fundamental transformation of the socio-political and economic structure of Roman society. Victorious wars caused a massive influx of slaves into Italy. Slavery gradually became the basis of production relations. Hundreds of thousands of slaves accumulated in Italy. Slave revolts became regular occurrences. Thus, in 138 BCE, slaves in Sicily revolted. Revolts. The rebels took control of the entire island and even attempted to create their own state. Only in 132 BCE did the Roman army manage to suppress this movement. This was followed by an equally large-scale Second Sicilian slave revolt, and already in 73 BCE, the largest slave revolt in ancient history occurred under the leadership of Spartacus. Only thanks to an extraordinary strain of the Roman Republic's forces was the revolt suppressed. The development of large latifundia, based exclusively on the exploitation of cheap slave labor, caused the mass ruin of medium and small peasant households unable to withstand the competition. The tribune Tiberius Gracchus, to solve the land issue, proposed establishing a maximum allowable size of land ownership and dividing the surplus among the landless Romans. Overcoming the powerful resistance of the nobles, Gracchus succeeded in getting the law passed. However, he was soon killed. In fact, the reform was not implemented. His brother, the reformer Gaius Gracchus, proposed beginning the distribution of the land fund of conquered provinces among the landless Roman citizens. These initiatives of Gracchus caused unrest in Rome. The reformer was killed. The death of the Gracchus brothers only intensified social contradictions. Moreover, the spread of Roman influence to distant territories contributed to the development of trade and commodity money relations. Wealth flowed like a river into Rome from the hands of military commanders and provincial governors. A merchant and construction aristocracy appeared in Rome. At the beginning of the 1st century BCE, the struggle of the Italic peoples for their rights intensified. In 91 BCE, the tribune Drusus repeated Gracchus's proposal for the emancipation of the Italic peoples. The failure of the bill in the Senate served as a pretext for the outbreak of the social war. Despite the fact that the Italic peoples were defeated, the Senate was nevertheless forced to make concessions and include the entire population of the Apennine Peninsula in the Roman civic community. This in turn led to the Popular Assembly effectively becoming a legal fiction. Crisis. Against the backdrop of growing socioeconomic contradictions, the crisis of Roman civilization became vividly apparent. Republican political institutions formed as organs of power of a small rural community were not capable of effectively governing the colossal territories that had become part of the Roman state. Thus, provinces were handed over to the complete disposal of governors appointed by the Senate. The ruin of provinces through endless and essentially uncontrolled extortions constantly sparked rebellions against Roman domination. The most large-scale attempt to throw off the Roman yoke was a series of wars against Rome by King Mithridates VI, ruler of the small Hellenistic state of Pontus, located in Asia Minor. The last century of the Republic's existence became a period of acute struggle between various strata of Roman society, periodically escalating into civil war. Two opposing parties finally formed in Rome: the Optimates for the preservation of the nobles' power, and the Populares advocating the necessity of reforms. The highest point of the struggle between these movements was the period of activity of Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Marius rose to prominence during the war against Mithridates. During this conflict, Marius carried out a military reform. Military service was replaced by a professional army. The poorest strata of Roman society, whose property status directly depended on the success of their commander, were admitted to military service. The army and its leaders became an independent political force, essentially independent of the Senate. Thanks to the army reform, Rome was able to successfully repel the invasion of the Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutones. After the dispatch of Sulla and his army to the east, power in Rome passed into the hands of Marius's supporters. Upon Sulla's return to Italy, the political struggle between the parties escalated into open civil war. Once again, taking control of Rome, Sulla established a dictatorship supported by political terror. In fact, Sulla's dictatorship was the last attempt to preserve the political dominance of the nobles and the power of the Senate. Soon the rise of Gnaeus Pompey the Great occurred. He participated in suppressing the Spartacus revolt, gained fame in the war against pirates, and through his campaigns in the Near East and Transcaucasia. In 61 BCE, Pompey, together with the oligarch Marcus Crassus and the aristocrat Gaius Julius Caesar, formed a political alliance better known as the First Triumvirate. Its members, relying on the army, divided power over the provinces among themselves. The Triumvirate. Caesar was granted the administration of Illyricum and Gaul, most of which was not under Roman control. During the Gallic War, the entire country was subjugated to Caesar. The victorious war brought the commander enormous booty, which Caesar used to strengthen his political positions and popularity among the Roman plebs. The threat of Caesar's strengthening forced Pompey to conspire with the Senate and order Caesar to disband his army and appear in Rome for trial. Caesar, crossing the border of Italy, the Rubicon River, effectively declared war on the Senate. During the Civil War, Caesar won a series of victories over Pompey and his supporters in Greece, North Africa, and Spain. In 45 BCE, he was proclaimed Father of the Fatherland and lifelong dictator, effectively an unlimited ruler of the Republic. The increasingly openly monarchical nature of Caesar's power caused discontent among the aristocratic opposition. The assassination of Caesar. In 44 BCE, Caesar was killed by a group of conspirators led by Brutus and Cassius. Caesar's death led to the resumption of civil wars. Caesar's supporters, the Caesarians, fought for the dictator's inheritance. In 43 BCE, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, who joined them, concluded an alliance, the Second Triumvirate. The triumvirs harshly dealt with the opposition, after which they moved against the Republicans. In the Battle of Philippi, the Republican army was crushed. Its leaders, Brutus and Cassius, committed suicide. After the victory over the Republicans, a struggle began between the triumvirs. Antony, supporting Ptolemaic Egypt, fought against Octavian. The war between them ended with the victory of Octavian's fleet at the Battle of Actium. With the annexation of Egypt to Rome in 31 BCE, Octavian became the sole ruler, and just 3 years later, the obsequious Senate bestowed upon him the title Augustus, sacred. The state, formally without eliminating republican institutions, in fact, became a monarchy, the Roman Empire. After a period of civil wars, the Roman Republic ceased to exist. Octavian Augustus became its first emperor. The era of his reign is considered the golden age of the empire due to the conquest of vast territories, the development of the economy, culture, and art. Under Octavian, a form of state governance known as the Principate was established in Rome, characterized by a combination of monarchical rule with the preservation of republican institutions such as the Senate and magistracies, creating the appearance of a republican system. Octavian Augustus. All of Emperor Augustus's foreign policy was aimed at establishing peace in the vast country, which had been shaken for decades by civil wars, as well as strengthening the position in distant provinces. Therefore, Augustus's policy can be characterized as very cautious and restrained. However, Octavian Augustus conducted several military campaigns. Egypt and southern France were conquered, and a favorable peace was concluded with Parthia. At the same time, Octavian attempted to subjugate the Germanic tribes, but after losing at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, decided not to cross the Rhine, fortifying the zone along the river to protect against hostile tribes. Under Octavian, the empire began trading with India and established diplomatic relations with China. As for internal policy, extremely important reforms for the state were carried out. Even during the struggle with Mark Antony, Octavian, collecting money literally from every Roman purse, understood how expensive maintaining an army was, and each time gathering and disbanding legionaries was insanely costly. Therefore, when Augustus finally achieved peace and tranquility in Rome, he created a regular professional army. Augustus significantly reduced the number of troops, leaving only 25 out of 75 legions, but disciplined and combat-ready, well-equipped and technically supplied according to all the requirements of the military art of that time. The legions were quartered in the provinces. The legion commanders, legates, and senior commanders, as well as military tribunes, were appointed by Octavian Augustus himself. The term of service for soldiers in the legions was set at 20 years. During service, soldiers received an annual salary and afterward a land allotment. This was a regular, reliable army. In addition, the legendary Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal army, was created. As for social policy, the emperor sought to gain the support of all strata of Roman society. He demanded respect for senators, raising their property qualification and declaring them the highest class. He attracted the plebs with free bread distributions and spectacles, at which the emperor himself invariably appeared. In addition, at the expense of Octavian and members of his family, massive construction unfolded in Rome: the Forum, the Altar of Peace, the Pantheon, repair of the city's sewer system, public baths, the first public library, and much more. Augustus himself said, "I found Rome brick, I leave it marble." These measures strengthened Augustus's popularity and also enhanced the prestige of Rome as the capital of the empire. During the years of Augustus's reign, great efforts were made to ensure the constant and uninterrupted supply of the huge, populous city with bread and water. For this, large warehouses were built on the Tiber and in the port of Rome, and aqueducts were repaired. Augustus meticulously reviewed candidates for Roman citizenship and constantly instilled in the Romans that they were born rulers of the world. The purpose of these measures was to create sharp boundaries that would separate Romans from non-Romans, which corresponded to the principle of divide and rule, repeatedly tested by Rome. People who did not comply with the marriage and childbirth laws were restricted in their right to inheritance and holding office. Conversely, people who had 3 or more children received various privileges and state benefits. Octavian issued a law limiting the release of slaves, a law against adultery, restored temples, trying to revive in people a sense of piety, strengthening law and order, and reviving traditional moral values which had been severely shaken as a result of civil wars. Augustus's flexible policy suited both senators and plebs. Octavian's constant concern was the cultural development of Rome. Even Roman authors called the time of his reign the golden age of Roman culture. With the princeps' support, literature, science, and art flourished, with the creativity of great poets Virgil, Horace, Ovid, historians Titus Livius and Pompeius Trogus, geographer Strabo, architect and writer Vitruvius. All of them increased. As never before, the glory of Rome. The Mediterranean Sea was the cradle and creator of a unified economic system. Experiencing a cash crisis, Octavian carried out a monetary reform and began minting gold coins instead of silver ones. By the way, it was his idea to depict the emperor's profile on coins, which was extremely important for ideology. A new tax system was established, and the road network was modernized. With Octavian's death, his golden age also ended. The question of succession arose. Subsequently, it would be passed from father to son, but at the time of the emperor's death, such a practice did not yet exist. Augustus had been concerned about this during his lifetime and had already identified potential successors. First in line was his comrade-in-arms Marcellus, for whom Octavian even gave his daughter Julia in marriage. However, the potential successor died. Then Octavian adopted the children from his wife Livia's first marriage. One of them was Tiberius Claudius Nero. Tiberius. For the first few years, Tiberius ruled in agreement with the Senate. One of his first decrees was to transfer to the Senate the right to elect magistrates. Consuls became people unofficially chosen by Tiberius. As a rule, the emperor offered the Senate several candidates, each of whom was agreeable to him. Tiberius was frugal. To replenish the treasury, he stopped construction and state-funded festivals. Under Tiberius, the law on state treason and insult to authority, adopted during the Republican era, was actively applied. Accusations of state treason became a means of political struggle used by senators to climb to the top and eliminate competitors. Soon, all judicial proceedings for violating the law on insult to authority were directed against representatives of the Senate's opposition. The result was executions and confiscation of property. In addition, Tiberius distinguished himself by expelling the Jews from Rome. The Praetorian Guard was stationed in Rome, and its prefects from the equestrian class acquired enormous influence. Over time, Tiberius became unsociable and suspicious, which led to his decision to leave Rome and go to Capri. He never returned to Rome. On Capri, Tiberius spent his time in orgies. Roman authors wrote with disgust. The emperor communicated with the Senate through correspondence, accepted or rejected proposals, sent letters demanding punishment for someone among the aristocrats displeasing to him, and personally read denunciations from senators. Rome was plunged into an atmosphere of denunciations for several years when no one knew whether their interlocutor was a friend or an enemy. Society, which still remembered such fundamental values as freedom and equality of citizens, negatively perceived Tiberius's withdrawal from affairs. In 37 CE, the elderly emperor fell ill and died. Roman authors embellished the transfer of power from Tiberius to Caligula with details such as the comatose emperor waking up when everyone had already sworn allegiance to Caligula, and the new princeps, with the Praetorian prefect having to suffocate Tiberius with clothing. The Romans rejoiced at the death of the princeps. Caligula. The Senate read the will according to which Tiberius Gemellus, the grandson of the deceased emperor, and Gaius Caligula were declared co-heirs and were to share power. Caligula demanded that the Senate deify Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus, and Germanicus. This is precisely how the full name of the new emperor sounded. He loved his nickname, Caligula, although it was quite heroic. Caligula means little boot. In small boots, fashioned like military ones, the future emperor ran around his father Germanicus's military camp, the subduer of the Germans, a triumphator, consul, and favorite of the entire Roman people. Roman citizens joyfully welcomed the new ruler. The troops remembered him as a child, and the people knew him as the son of Germanicus. Moreover, Tiberius had been cruel, and Gaius behaved like a pious Roman. He brought to Rome and solemnly buried the ashes of Germanicus, no less solemnly buried Tiberius, and delivered a highly praised by contemporaries funeral speech. And as emperor, Caligula was even good at first. He granted a political amnesty, abolished the law on insult to majesty. Caligula pursued a liberal policy, distributed the debts remaining after his predecessor, abolished the sales tax, actively engaged in construction, not only of palaces but also of public buildings, aqueducts, and roads. Large-scale works stimulated economic development. He respected the rights of the Senate, returned to ordinary Romans the right to elect some magistrates, regularly arranged public gift distributions, gladiatorial fights, and theatrical performances. However, in 37 CE, he fell seriously ill and apparently lost his mind. It is thought that his lover and future fourth wife, Caesonia, poisoned him. The potion was supposed to arouse love in him, but caused madness. Reports Suetonius, the ancient Roman writer and author of the Lives of the 12 Caesars. But there are more pragmatic versions, such as Encephalitis. The recovered Caligula was horrifying in his debauchery. Right at a feast, Caligula could take the wife of a respected man, take her to his chambers, and upon returning, vividly describe her merits and flaws in bed. Or take the bride from the groom right at the wedding, or sometimes the groom from the bride. In 38 CE, Caligula's beloved sister Drusilla, the wife of his favorite Marcus Lepidus, died. Gaius slept with both Marcus and Drusilla, they say, and with other sisters too. But Drusilla was still the most beloved. After her death, Marcus Lepidus became involved with the sisters, and together they formed a conspiracy against Gaius. The conspiracy was uncovered. All its participants, except the sisters, were executed. They themselves were sent into exile. The second stage of Caligula's reign is exclusively the story of his debauchery and bloodthirstiness. Strictly speaking, it was difficult to surprise the Romans of that time with cruelty or debauchery. But Caligula managed. Once Gaius ordered the senators to be gathered for an important meeting in the middle of the night, and when they appeared, frightened, he danced before them in a woman's dress and left. But the senators were hardly offended. Everything could have ended much worse for them. Caligula's endless and very expensive entertainments ruined the state treasury. and Caligula began to look for sources to replenish it. Firstly, he increased taxes, no thing. No person remained without a tax. But money still wasn't enough. Then Caligula began to demand that he be mentioned in wills. It is clear that with such an approach to affairs, Caligula had no chance of a long and happy life. The oracle warned Gaius to beware of Cassius, and he sent to kill the proconsul of Asia Cassius Longinus. But the devil is in the details. The conspiracy was prepared by the commander of the Praetorians, Chaerea. Here Caligula was to blame himself. One must be polite to one's own guards. He called Chaerea an old stern warrior, a public whore, and when it was his turn to stand guard, gave him passwords like Venus, love, and so on. In general, Chaerea and several other conspirators stabbed Caligula as he was leaving the theater. They did not know what to do next. And then a soldier found Caligula's uncle, Claudius, hiding behind a curtain out of fear. They proclaimed him the new emperor. The impression produced by Caligula's reign on Roman society was so strong that at a meeting of the Senate convened by the consuls, they spoke about restoring the republic. But while the Senate debated the political structure of the state, the people had already decided this issue surrounding Claudius with a crowd. They proclaimed him emperor, Claudius. What did he become known for? He was a man interested in science and wrote the history of the Romans, Etruscans, and Carthaginians. He executed all of Caligula's murderers. Despite all his scholarly quirks, the quiet Claudius turned out to be a very capable administrator. One of the main innovations was the creation of a permanent state apparatus. A chancellery was established under the emperor, in which some officials dealt with collecting revenues for the imperial treasury, others considered matters submitted to the emperor, and a third group developed imperial edicts. Under Claudius, a law was enacted that softened punishments. Claudius was the first emperor who widely granted Roman citizenship to the population of provincial cities, especially for service to the empire. Under Claudius, Britain was finally conquered. Claudius's wife, Messalina, was a terrible harlot. According to contemporary accounts, no one had as many lovers as she did. It even reached the point that together with her next lover, she organized a conspiracy against the emperor. It was uncovered, and Messalina was stabbed to death. 3 months after Messalina's execution, Claudius married again. His wife became Agrippina, the younger Caligula's own sister. Agrippina already had a son, young Nero, who was to inherit the power of his adoptive father. Agrippina began paving the way to the throne for her son. At her instigation, Junius Silanus, who was engaged to Claudius's daughter Octavia, was condemned. Silanus committed suicide, and the marital union, whose heirs could become Nero's competitors, fell apart. Octavia became Nero's bride. Soon, Agrippina's son was adopted by Claudius. Now his name sounded like Nero Claudius Drusus Germanicus Caesar. According to Suetonius, in the last year of his life, Claudius became disillusioned with Agrippina and Nero. He wanted to change his will, but Agrippina outpaced him. Claudius was poisoned. After his death, power passed to his adopted son Nero, who would become an even more monstrous emperor than Caligula himself. Nero. Due to his young age, Nero did not rule the country independently. He was advised by Seneca and his mother. Therefore, the first years of Nero's reign on the throne are characterized by historians as quite mild times. But the bright period of Nero's reign did not last long. A couple of years after the young man's accession, his mother began to actively interfere in her son's personal life. First, she demanded getting rid of Nero's beloved, the former slave Acte. Then she tried to arrange a relationship for the emperor, offering her son various brides who did not please Nero himself. Soon, Nero entered into an open conflict with his mother. Several times he ordered the liquidation of Agrippina. These attempts proved futile. The woman miraculously survived a sinking ship, crawled out from under a collapse, or discovered poison in her food and tactfully refused to eat. Nero got rid of his mother bloodlessly by exiling her from the palace. After that, Nero gained confidence in himself and decided to rule independently. Along with his mother, Seneca suffered. The philosopher was accused of a conspiracy that did not actually exist. Nero was dissatisfied that the sage limited the ruler in his actions with his advice. A few years later, Seneca committed suicide on Nero's orders. Now, the emperor was free from the influence of his immediate entourage. In his political decisions, he delegated most state concerns to the Senate. However, the role of the first years of independent reign should not be underestimated. The young man, desiring to have fun and not dreaming of military conquest, relieved the state of enormous military expenses, reduced some taxes, and partially curtailed corruption. During Nero's reign, who loved shows, theaters, and stadiums for gladiatorial games were massively built. It is noteworthy that the emperor himself also performed, albeit at an amateur level. He mastered the lyre, composed poetry, and often turned into an actor before the court. Nero's problem was that his entourage was afraid to tell the emperor the truth about his abilities, constantly flattering the ruler and praising the young man's talent. The Roman leader from the Julio-Claudian dynasty also began to show vengefulness. Sometime after exiling Agrippina from the palace, the young man ordered her execution. After his mother's murder, the emperor often spoke of her. A few years later, Nero became even more cruel. A wave of political repression swept across the Roman Empire. People massively informed on each other. Most were executed for insulting the emperor's majesty. Notably, an official reason for issuing a death sentence on this charge could be, for example, mockery of Nero's acting talent. The situation was exacerbated by the Great Fire of Rome. It is believed that the mad emperor himself ordered the city to be burned. However, Nero blamed the early representatives of Christianity for the fire. They were subjected to persecution. The city's restoration required enormous funds. An economic crisis ensued. Disease outbreaks claimed the lives of several thousand people under Nero. This also hit the economy, reducing the number of taxpayers. This led to the formation of a conspiracy, which was quickly uncovered. Almost all participants in the conspiracy were repressed. After these events, Nero, remaining emperor, withdrew from politics and completely immersed himself in the sphere of arts. In the Roman Empire, masks triumphed again and again. Nero also arranged grand performances where roles were distributed not among professional actors but among the nobility. Refusal to participate could lead to execution. Therefore, representatives of the nobility overcame themselves, put on ridiculous clothes, and went on stage to make fools of themselves. Once, Nero went on a trip to Greece, the mother of theater. There, the emperor was joyfully received for his performances. For this, the ruler exempted Greece from taxes which severely hit the finances of the already troubled Rome. Riots and uprisings began. When the emperor returned to Rome, the situation was at boiling point. Various detachments of rebels were already declaring their military leaders emperors. The court nobility ignored any orders. He was left completely alone. Finally, the Senate declared Nero an enemy of the people. The emperor decided to kill himself but could not muster the courage. His servant Epaphroditus, coming with a blade, helped him. Nero threw himself onto the blade. Thus died the last Roman emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty's reign led to a new phase of the struggle for power. For a year without power, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius ascended the throne. None of them managed to hold on to power. Vespasian, and in the summer of 69 CE, a congress of governors and legion commanders of the eastern provinces was held in the city of Bedriacum to elect a new emperor. He became Flavius Vespasian. He was an experienced commander and administrator, who shortly before Nero's death had fallen into disgrace for falling asleep during his theatrical performance. Flavius Vespasian ruled Rome for 10 years. He founded the Flavian dynasty. Under him, the unity of the empire was restored. He managed to suppress the unruly Germans, re-annex Gaul, and resettle the rebellious Jews to other provinces. In internal policy, Vespasian revived friendly relations with the Senate. He carried out a purge and replenished it with his supporters from among the Italian and provincial nobility, which caused a brief confrontation with part of the senators. Vespasian became famous as an emperor who, to replenish the treasury, invented all sorts of new laws. He canceled the privileges granted to Greece by Nero, introduced new taxes in particular. He ordered public toilets to be taxed. When his son Titus became indignant, the old emperor brought a silver denarius to his nose, saying, "Money does not smell." Under the first Flavian, the construction of the grandiose Roman circus known as the Colosseum began. The main goal of his principate was to restore the empire's finances, strengthen discipline in the army, maintain peaceful relations with Parthia. In general, to preserve the empire, which had been shaken after the period of Caligula's and Nero's reign. In 79 CE, Vespasian died his own death. Titus, Vespasian's son, Titus, a humorous man, continued his father's policy aimed at achieving a compromise between the Principate and the Senate. During Titus's brief reign, the Triumphal Arch, in honor of the victory in the Jewish War, which bears his name, was erected in Rome. But the main achievement of this emperor was the completion, during his reign, of the giant Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum. Its opening was celebrated with grandiose games. Titus's principate was also marked by a sad event. A terrible volcanic eruption occurred. Under ash and fiery lava, 3 Roman cities, Pompeii, Stabiae, and Herculaneum, perished. After the volcanic eruption, a terrible epidemic followed. Titus fell ill and soon died. The title was inherited by his brother Domitian. Domitian, from the very beginning of his reign, he entered into an open conflict with the Senate, seeking complete subordination. He arranged expensive spectacles, quickly emptying the treasury. He issued an extremely unpopular edict prescribing the cutting down of vineyards and expanding areas for grain crops. With these measures, the emperor hoped to reduce Rome's dependence on imported grain, but in the conditions of Italy, this was unprofitable and led to nothing but an increase in discontent. In a campaign against the Sarmatians, he did not succeed, losing a legion due to a series of unsuccessful battles. Domitian was forced to withdraw his troops beyond the Danube, agreeing to the humiliating condition for the Romans of paying tribute every year to the Sarmatian ruler Decebalus. In 96 CE, he was killed in his own bedroom. Thus, a transformation of power occurred from despotic under Augustus's successors to more orderly under the Flavians. A solid apparatus of the empire was created, strengthening the emperor's power. After Domitian's murder, the Senate proclaimed the elderly Marcus Cassius Nerva emperor. This did not suit either the army or the legionaries. The army's discontent forced Nerva to adopt the legate Trajan. For 3 months, they were co-rulers, and after Nerva's death in 98 CE, Trajan, originating from a Roman colony in Spain, and thus becoming the first provincial on the throne, became emperor. He continued the policy of cooperation with the Senate, which his successors also continued, giving an oath not to execute senators. For his good attitude, the Senate bestowed upon Trajan the honorary title Optimus, the best. Trajan cared about the enforcement of the empire's laws, the well-being of citizens. To support large, low-income families, the Imperial Alimentary Fund was created. Under him, new squares and buildings adorned Rome, and powerful roads connected different parts of the empire. Roman historians spoke positively about Trajan in one voice, practically not noting the ruler's shortcomings. He had a pleasant appearance and a well-built physique, and what can one say about his bravery and justice? They wrote about him. He was a virtuous man, and judging by all accounts, a very good person. His foreign policy pursued the goal of restoring Roman military power. The wars with the Dacians were cruel, but successful. After victories in Dacia, Trajan began military actions against Parthia. He managed to capture Armenia and then Mesopotamia. However, an epidemic broke out in the Roman army, and Trajan was forced to turn back. On the way to Rome, he fell ill and died. As a result of Trajan's eastern campaigns, by 117 CE, the Roman Empire reached the peak of its military-political power, and the emperor himself remained in the memory of the Romans as the ideal ruler and commander. Therefore, he received the nickname, the best princeps. Trajan's column was erected even during his lifetime in honor of the victory over the Dacians. When Trajan died in 117 CE, the urn with his ashes was placed in the base of the column. Trajan's column has been treated with reverence throughout all times, probably precisely for this reason. It still stands in Rome today. After Trajan's death, the Roman emperor was proclaimed his distant relative Hadrian. Hadrian became the first emperor who was forced to abandon the Roman policy of conquests and gradually transition to strategic defense. The material embodiment of defense was the creation of a grand line of fortifications along the borders of the Roman Empire. He practically did not wage wars, returned Mesopotamia to the Parthians, and placed a dependent king on the Armenian throne. Hadrian gave generous gifts to allied cities. His reign was an era of diplomacy when Rome, not with legions but with gifts, cultural and economic dependence, continued to increase its influence. The buildings of Hadrian's time, unparalleled in the ancient world, are striking the pantheon, the temple of all gods. After Hadrian's death, power was received by the senator Antoninus, nicknamed Pius. Under him, the provinces flourished. He continued to grant Roman citizenship and Romanize Europe. Pius is one of the fathers of Roman law. Under him, the presumption of innocence was introduced into jurisprudence. Despite a number of wars, it was under him that a period of temporary stabilization of the Roman Empire occurred. After Antoninus's death, the throne was ascended by Marcus Aurelius, a known Stoic philosopher. Despite the emperor's peaceful nature, the years of his reign were not calm. Historians have calculated that out of 19 years of his reign, Rome was not at war for only 4 years. Constant battles raged on the empire's borders with Germanic tribes with the Parthians. At the same time, he was lenient toward personal enemies. After suppressing the rebellion of Gaius Cassius, the traditional massacre of its participants did not follow. But with Christians, Marcus Aurelius behaved rather harshly. He despised these sectarians for their fanaticism and did not cease persecutions against them. In the Colosseum arena, predators continued to kill and tear Christians for the amusement of the Roman crowd. In 180 CE, an epidemic broke out in the Roman army. Marcus Aurelius became infected and died a few days later. The end of the era of the 5 good emperors came with the reign of Commodus, Emperor Commodus. He inherited the empire at the age of 19. According to contemporary accounts, he placed his own interests far above Rome's interests. In this, he was unlike his father, the last good emperor who had given his subjects stability. The young man was distinguished by a love of ostentatious luxury. Funds constantly disappeared from the treasury. Dignitaries enriched themselves without a twinge of conscience. The state did not punish them. Commodus handed over the management of Rome to his favorite former slave Latus. Partly, this decision predetermined the ruler's fate. Latus sold high positions in Rome. He was hated. Latus took for himself funds intended for charity. The emperor was extremely suspicious. This trait manifested itself especially vividly after an unsuccessful conspiracy involving Commodus's sister. The ruler was constantly delivered denunciations. Those suspected of treason were cruelly executed. All strata of the population were united in their hatred of the emperor. Corruption became ineradicable. Commodus placed himself on a par with the gods. The ruler's self-love knew no bounds. On Commodus's coins he was depicted in the image of Hercules, the son of Zeus. Often the emperor appeared in the gladiatorial arena. Spectators saw a stately man in the attire of Hercules who shot arrows at beasts from behind a fence. In the conspiracy against the young emperor, his lover Marcia participated, to whom the emperor had granted broad powers. The senator Eclectus, the praetorian prefect in Marcia, gave the victim poison. However, it did not work. Then the emperor was killed by his own slave, Narcissus. Thus ended not only the 15-year reign, but also the Antonine dynasty disappeared. After the young emperor's death, a period of interregnum and civil war began, at the end of which Septimius Severus came to power. A new dynasty's era began. The Severans had Italo-Roman roots. Also, according to one of their ancestors, they either descended from Punics who had undergone Romanization or belonged to a Roman family that had somewhat distanced itself from native culture over time in Africa. The regime created by Severus represented a military bureaucratic monarchy. The Senate lost its significance. Many senators were executed, and their property confiscated. The emperor ruled the empire through written decrees, so-called constitutions. The main governing body became the Princeps' Council. The rule of this dynasty brought the Roman Empire closer to its end. In foreign policy, Severus's main enterprise was the victorious war with Parthia. Mesopotamia was declared a Roman province. In exchange, the Romans ceded part of Armenia to the Parthians. Severus had two sons, Caracalla and Geta. The stepbrothers hated each other, and soon Caracalla killed Geta, after which he killed all his supporters. Having acquired a taste for it, the cruel tyrant ordered the execution of his own wife, cousin, and many other wealthy and noble people. Fiscal difficulties led to the publication, in Caracalla's name, of an edict that declared all free people of the empire citizens, but they thereby became taxpayers, and immediately the tax burden sharply increased. Caracalla was hated by senators and worshipped by soldiers. He increased the legionaries' pay by 1.5 times. During a campaign against the Parthians, Caracalla was killed on the orders of his prefect Macrinus. A Moor by origin, Macrinus was proclaimed emperor. However, already the next year, Macrinus, together with his son, was killed in a coup. After Caracalla's murder and Macrinus's brief reign, the young Elagabalus, originating from a Syrian family and consecrated as the chief priest of the Phoenician sun god, was proclaimed emperor. This ruler demonstrated disrespect for Roman religion, cultivated debauchery. Therefore, he was assigned a co-ruler, his cousin Alexander Severus. When the dissatisfied Elagabalus tried to destroy the new ruler, he was killed by rebelling soldiers. Under Alexander, a constructive dialogue with the Senate was restored. However, the army remained the main political force. As soon as the government cut expenses on maintaining the legions, soldiers' unrest immediately followed, rarely without violence. Meanwhile, a threat loomed over Rome from the east and the Rhine. Alexander Severus's government tried to buy peace from the Germans by paying colossal sums of money. News of this shameful deal became known to the legionaries. A spontaneous soldiers' mutiny arose, during which the emperor was killed. The end of the Severan dynasty's rule marked the Roman Empire's entry into a period of unprecedented depth of social and military political crisis in history. The crisis of the 3rd century. It received the name Crisis of the 3rd Century. An era of imperial musical chairs began. The empire was shaken. In 33 years, 29 emperors were proclaimed for this post, and only one of them, Aurelian, died a nonviolent death. The empire plunged into chaos. The amount of arable land and population decreased. Cities declined. Trade was paralyzed. There were continuous wars simultaneously with several opponents. During this period, a legionary, a knight, and a senator ruled. The emperor, who was at the head of the central government, was forced to both repel attacks by external enemies and fight against Roman troops supporting usurpers. The western part of the empire suffered from constant invasions by the Alemanni and Franks. Moreover, the former, in their raids, managed to penetrate even into Italy, while the latter devastated Roman territory as far as southern Spain. The seacoast was ravaged by the Saxons, and the Marcomanni managed to obtain from the emperor the concession of part of Upper Pannonia. The eastern provinces of the state suffered no less damage from the invasions of the Goths, Persians, and other peoples. At this stage, the process of the empire's disintegration occurred. The Gallic Empire and the Palmyrene Kingdom broke away. Emperor Aurelian undertook decisive steps to reform not only the army but also, partly, the system of governance. Although he did not manage to solve all the problems facing him as a result of his reforms, which did not affect the foundations of the Roman military organization, but significantly modified it, a more mobile army was created, capable of responding promptly to external and internal threats. The final stage of the crisis is characterized by the fact that the Romans managed to stop the main flows of barbarian invasions. Moreover, Aurelian's successor, partly using some of his developments, managed to stabilize the situation on the borders, stop disintegration processes, and even restore the unity of the empire. The city wall, built at the end of the crisis to protect Rome from external threats and the coming to power of the Illyrian dynasty, marked the gradual withdrawal of Rome from the crisis. Aurelian repelled the invasion of Germanic tribes that had invaded Italy for the first time, restored Roman administration in the eastern provinces, and subjugated the Gallic Empire. The throne was ascended by the Illyrian Diocles, known under the name Diocletian. The Dominate became the next phase of Rome's gradual transformation into an absolute monarchy, with unlimited power of the emperor. During the Principate, the old republican institutions were preserved and formally continued to function, and the head of state, the Princeps, was considered only the first citizen of the Republic. During the Dominate, the Roman Senate turned into an estate with decorative functions. The main title of the head of state instead of Princeps and Emperor became Augustus, sacred, and Dominus, Lord, which implied that all others were his subordinates, being in relation to him in the position of subordinate sons or slaves. Under Diocletian, the empire was divided into 4 parts. Diocletian began the persecution of Christians, as a result of which many martyrs appeared. The emperor ordered churches to be closed and books destroyed. During his 20-year reign, he almost never visited Rome, establishing order in various parts of the state. The empire strengthened, and the situation stabilized relatively for about 100 years. In the post-crisis period, the economic situation improved somewhat, but overall the economy did not recover. The general imperial market was practically destroyed. There was a general decline in agriculture, insecurity on the roads, growth of economic, and as a consequence, political separatism. Diocletian peacefully relinquished power and spent the rest of his life in his homeland, in Illyria, in his estate in Salona, where he lived in seclusion for 6 years. In response to the attempts of his co-rulers to persuade him to return to power, the former emperor refused, noting, among other things, if you had seen what cabbage he grew, you would not bother him with your proposals. Power came to Emperor Constantine. At the beginning of his reign, Constantine, like all previous emperors, was a pagan. However, understanding the widespread adoption of Christianity among the population of Rome and the need to unite the people, Constantine became the first emperor to accept Christianity. Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. From this moment, Christianity began to acquire the status of a state religion. The city of Rome ceased to be the emperor's residence. In conditions of constant danger of external invasion, the ruler had to be closer to the empire's borders. From this point of view, the location of the capital was inconvenient. Therefore, starting with Diocletian, emperors located their residences in cities more suited to the strategic goals of defending the state. Constantine was no exception to this rule. He became obsessed with the dream of creating a new capital that would symbolize the beginning of a new era in Rome's history. The basis for the future city was the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, later renamed Constantinople. Thus, Constantine changed the empire administratively, ideologically, and religiously. After Constantine, his successors ruled, who tried to preserve the empire, but it continued to disintegrate. And in 354 CE, an event occurred that brought the empire closer to its final collapse, the Great Migration of Peoples. The Great Migration of Peoples began. This event was triggered by the migration of Hun tribes from the borders of China to Europe. They swept away everything in their path and launched a process that can be compared to the domino effect. An additional impetus for mass migrations was climate change, which forced nomadic peoples to seek more comfortable places to the south. As a result, numerous Germanic and Slavic tribes began to massively relocate to new lands, heading, in particular, to the territories of the Roman Empire. Theodosius III, as the last emperor of the United Roman Empire, allowed the Goths to settle on imperial lands. Over time, the weakened government began to recruit its former enemies, such as the Goths, Vandals, and Franks, into its army Y, so that they would protect them from other barbarians. As a result, these tribes exerted significant influence on Rome's economy and political life. The fall of the Roman Empire. Regardless of the reasons that caused the migration of peoples, the Roman Empire could no longer withstand the invasion of tribes. Weakened by a deep political crisis, the empire was on the brink. In 395 CE, Theodosius divided the empire into eastern and western parts, unable to maintain unity in conditions of general chaos and constant threats from barbarians. This step became the beginning of the process of the empire's disintegration. Its eastern part, with its capital in Constantinople, was richer and better governed. The western part, with its center in Rome, slowly died. At the twilight of the Western Empire, its capital would even become the city of Ravenna. The barbarians, having penetrated through the borders, began to seize territories. In 408 and 409 CE, the Visigoths besieged Rome, which twice avoided destruction by paying ransom. In 410 CE, when the Visigoths tried to repeat their trick, the Romans refused to pay the ransom. This led to terrible famine and even cases of cannibalism. In despair, the slaves opened the city gates, and for the first time in 800 years, Rome was captured by an enemy army. The city was looted, but the Visigoth leader spared Christians and those who found refuge in temples. The Romans were lucky that the Germanic leader professed Arianism, one of the early branches of Christianity. From this moment, the empire no longer seemed invincible to other peoples. In 451 CE, the tribes of the Huns, under the leadership of Attila, invaded the Western Roman Empire from the east. However, the Roman commander Aetius, allying with barbarian tribes, inflicted a defeat on the Huns in the Battle of the Catalaunian Fields in Gaul. Soon, the Huns invaded Italy again, and only the death of Attila and the collapse of the Hunnic Union saved Rome from the threat. Aetius reached the peak of his power but was killed on the orders of Emperor Valentinian III due to palace intrigues. Aetius became the last outstanding Roman commander who did not have barbarian origins. His death helped the emperor's enemies overthrow Valentinian, and soon Rome suffered terrible devastation from the Vandals who captured it. Unlike the Visigoth leader, the Vandals spared no one. After this, the words Vandal and vandalism entered many languages of the world. In other times, politics in Rome was often bloody, but earlier the state was reborn like a phoenix from the ashes. But this came to an end. Rome was no longer what it used to be. The throne became an object of manipulation for barbarian warlords who could, at their discretion, elevate to it and overthrow emperors. The last emperor of Rome, striving for independent policy, was Majorian. He tried to restore control over Spain and part of Gaul. The emperor also tried to stop the destruction of Rome's architecture. However, he was overthrown by the barbarian warlord Ricimer and died in 461 CE. Under Rome's power, only Italy remained. The prolonged agony of the Western Roman Empire was ended by the leader of the Heruli Odoacer. In 476 CE, he overthrew the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, sent the insignia of supreme power to the Byzantine emperor Zeno, and founded his own barbarian kingdom on the territory of Italy. The Eastern emperor Zeno elevated Odoacer to patrician and recognized him as the Roman governor, although de facto he was an independent ruler. Modern historiography has adopted 476 CE as the boundary separating the ancient and medieval eras. However, contemporaries of the events, although they recognized Odoacer's coup, did not perceive it as the final death of the empire or a turning point in history. The inhabitants of the Eastern Roman Empire believed that all possessions and power could still be regained. The reasons for the fall of the Western Roman Empire are still debated in academic circles. The following factors are highlighted: corruption and degeneration of Roman emperors, the increasing pressure of barbarians on the empire's borders, and climate change toward aridity and cold. On the ruins of the Western Roman Empire, barbarian kingdoms arose from which many modern European states later formed. The outstanding Roman civilization gave the world law, Latin, architecture, economy, the tax system. It laid the foundations for the cultural and political development of European civilization, which continue to influence the modern world. Probably no civilization in the world can compare in terms of the legacy that Rome passed on to its descendants. Rome still amazes the imagination. How could they build such aqueducts, make such political decisions, construct such a political system? After all, the Middle Ages will be considered dark compared to what happened during the Golden Age of Roman culture. The cultural renaissance of Europe will come only after the Middle Ages and will appeal precisely to Rome as the golden age of humanity in the eyes of posterity. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel, like it, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the release of new videos. Share your impressions of the video in the comments.